Hey everyone, Elisa Wood here from Energy Changemakers. So, grid reliability, operational efficiency, and regulatory compliance are at the top of every utility's priority list. But achieving those goals isn't always easy, especially if electric utilities are taking a siloed approach. We're here today to talk about a solution known as Network Model Management for Utilities, or NMM for short. I'm pleased to have with me Matt Burton. He's the Vice President of Grid Software Sales at Siemens. Siemens is an ambassador program member of Energy Changemakers. So Matt, thank you so much for being here today to talk about this interesting and somewhat complex topic. I really appreciate having you here. How are you today?
I'm great. Appreciate the opportunity to be here as well and to join you from my home office here. But that's a really important topic for me and for Siemens and for the industry. So excited to dig in.
I agree. We're hearing more and more about it. So let me ask you first. So like I mentioned, utilities today tend to take a siloed approach to managing electric grid data.
Mhm.
What does this mean? What does this look like? And why is it limited in its effectiveness? What problems does it cause for utilities is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and there's a lot of history there. Really, just historically with electric utilities, I mean, it's a miracle we even have electric power in our homes and businesses. I mean, it's only really been 100 or so years in development. But if you look at all that historically, there really was just no need for a lot of cross pollination of information across different departments of utilities. It used to be that, okay, we're going to do our distribution planning. That's, the lower voltage section of the grid. We're going to get that power to people's homes. A lot of the planning that went in there where you're really just consuming, there was no, distribution, customer sided generation. You didn't really need to consider what you were doing there in context of what's going to happen on the transmission network, or how's generation going to react, or how's the control center going to change their operations to deal with that. And similarly with the transmission planning departments, with protections and controls departments, and with that operations center, uh, they've kind of grown up in silos. And now we're seeing this shift. We've been seeing it probably 15, 20 years or so, where with the proliferation of customer sited energy resources, now these departments and these different parts of the industry are impacting each other much more than they ever have before. And so now we can start facing issues like reverse power flow on the transmission network even. It's not very common yet, but the signs are there. It is happening in some places. And those kind of challenges can lead to big cascading failures on the transmission network, on the distribution network. Every few years, just saw it in Europe, literally, I think yesterday, huge outages. We don't know the cause of that one yet, but you can look up the NERC website. There's always, every few years and getting more frequent, some big power outages that can be linked to, lack of visibility across these different departments. So the problems that the siloed issue can cause are very large, which is why it's important now to get a start on resolving some of those.
We definitely live in a different world, don't we now, in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of the way the grid is working. And so explain to me what network model management is.
So network model management is really a concept in the industry around breaking down all those barriers to connect all those silos together. And so right now, if we kind of dig into the details, if you look at the transmission planning team, right, they were operating in their silo. They're doing everything in the software that they're used to using, producing data and outputs and files in a certain format that's useful in that context. And also, very importantly, at a certain level of data fidelity in those models that matters to what they're doing. And if you were to compare transmission maybe to a protections and controls team, the protections people are going to have much more detail in their models because of the kind of work that they have to do around protection schemes and that sort of analysis. And so when they're working in their silos, everything's working okay. But when we want to bring all this together, suddenly there's a huge combination of software changes. Those teams can use that same software they're using for their analysis, but how do you transform that data into a format that is relevant to all these different departments and can be transformed in the ways that they need. So that way you can avoid, okay, look, we got a change in our grid over here. Transmission planning department, update your model. Protections, update yours. Operations team, update your model. And if you do that enough, those models really won't look like each other at all anymore. So when you can bring that change in to a consistent data platform like network model management, and then disperse those changes to those other teams, suddenly you're going to have a lot more consistency across these departments. They're going to be able to plan and get ahead of the same challenges. And even better, they're going to be able to share what they're learning across those departments. Outside of even just sharing that verbally, now they can share the literal data so they can all make better decisions.
So it's a more holistic system then.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And we always talk about regulation when it comes to electric power because it's such a big driver of everything. So I'm curious how the regulatory arena has made network model management perhaps more important.
Yes. Regulations are really what drive our industry, at the end of the day. I believe in Europe, they have some very direct regulations around how you need to manage that data. In the US, there are a lot of regulations that kind of touch on that. And we've seen, even some fines levied for utilities that maybe haven't kept up to date or modeled appropriately, for example. Right now, there's not one overarching regulation that says you must model like this and is very prescriptive. Right now, we have a variety of orders that exist, are being worked on, or coming in the future that have to do with different elements that have a lot of influence on that model management and are going to influence how the utilities have to react in that scenario. So one might be, FERC Order 2023. It's a lot about streamlining the interconnection process. But if you think about how to solve for that problem, how can you streamline an interconnection process when you're dealing with data in all these different formats and teams that need to understand the implications of the interconnection aren't able to share data as quickly as possible because the volume we're seeing necessitates that. We could even look at, FERC 1920. So there is language in there about transmission planners needing to use up-to-date models in the usage of the cost calculation type analyses they have to do. And, there's more coming as well, FERC Order 901. That's starting to necessitate some more data and information from distribution level distributed energy resources into the transmission network. And so if you need to get that data from that distribution side into transmission, model management, just another really important way of getting that done. And rather than, trying to address these and pick these apart, okay, let's solve for this, and this, some of those more innovative utilities and system operators are out there looking at that model management approach more holistically so that they can solve these more broadly. And they're looking at putting scalable solutions in place that fit not only solving a breadth of those challenges, but also putting a solution in place where you can help solve for some of the process and kind of workflow change management that's needed at the same time.
So we ran through a lot of numbers for dockets a few minutes ago. I just want to tell our listeners or viewers that we have a two-part series on network model management running on Energy Changemakers. So you can take a look at that to get more detail on what Matt's talking about. Also, one of the articles talks about a Vermont utility that Siemens helped deploy with NMM. Can you tell our listeners some of the highlights of the case study?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, right now we're in the middle of supporting that utility in that deployment. Implementing something like a network model management, there are certainly quick wins and certain connections you can make that add value immediately to the organization. And in general, it's a longer process of that deployment. And okay, let's touch on this department. Let's integrate this data. The pinnacle that or the North Star that this Vermont utility has put in place is very transformative. It's very impressive. It's very cutting edge for the industry, and their end goal is connecting a lot of different data sources to really centralize that intelligence and decision making, because they have seen some of these grid reliability challenges. And so, they've really been pushing the boundaries, and we've been collaborating very heavily on putting those pieces in place that they need. And it's not always just one vendor solution that's going to solve for everything, right? So you need to consider what are the pieces that make sense there, and where and when to deploy. But really, the key piece is working with experienced vendors and experienced consultants who've delivered these projects and understand the different benefits and pitfalls in decisions you can make in the way in which you deploy these kind of solutions. And so right now we're hard at work on deploying what we call as ODMS. It's kind of a foundational layer of part of our model management solution. So with the utility in Vermont, we're helping them deploy our GridScale X network model management solution right now. And primarily a core piece of this is making sure that all of that planning data they're working with can be converted into what's called the common information model format. So without going it down into a whole rabbit hole, that is just an industry accepted data formatting scheme that can handle all the different data from transmission, protections and controls, distribution systems. And that's something that's always, through IEC standards and whatever else being updated. And core to our platform is the ability to handle those data transformations, and probably most importantly, help with the temporal management of the different operational and planning models. So if you think, okay, maybe I'm going to put a new substation in next year, maybe 5 years from now, I'm going to put in another one, or maybe I'm not. And then you can end up with a lot of different nested scenarios of potential future planning cases. And so how do you manage that in a way where you understand what those scenarios are, what cases should be considered foundational or source of truth, and just kind of inform an organization in how they should work with that different data. And so that's kind of table stakes right now. We're working hard with the utility in Vermont on that. And, we're looking at a multi-year roadmap of kind of their North Star and how Siemens as a key partner can, continue to support them in that effort.
Very interesting. Well, thanks, Matt. This has been a great discussion. I think it's very timely too. As you mentioned, there was a major power outage in Europe this week.
Mm-hmm.
And when these kind of events happen, we tend to talk about them for months to come. And there tends to be sort of a relook and reevaluation of how utilities are doing things, how the grid's being managed. So appreciate you bringing this information to our audience today.
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. I really appreciate the time.
Wonderful.